Oh, good morning, good afternoon, or good day, depending on where you're from. This is the Stockholm Center for Research Innovation Securities um, sort of research innovation series. And today we are looking at the fantastic pleasure to going to Canada. Now, Canada, of course, from a European perspective, is our, westernmost country in Europe. And so what we're going to be looking here is really, Canada has introduced a range of measures, including sort of research security guidelines. We have the National Security Guideline for Research Partnership and a risk assessment. We've been listening into different speakers from Europe and United States, of course, and other parts of the world. And this time we do have the absolute pleasure of having two prominent speakers from Canada to give us the Canadian version. And I hope that there will be some extremely interesting lessons for Europe and Canada's partner countries, but of course, other friends and allies of us. First of all, we have the Paul Jarrett, who is the Director on Research Security, Division of the Vice President and Research Innovation at the University of Toronto. And then we have Hobiola Raiba-Arevelo, and I apologize again for the butchering of the name, who is at University of Laval, University of Laval. And what we're going to do here is going to give a quick introduction, half an hour or so, on Canada's national security approach to research security, the risks that comes into research collaboration. And if you follow this series, you're going to see that a lot of these assessment of risk and possibilities differs a lot between the different states and how we approach sort of foreign interference and technology transfers. And I'm very, very keen on listening into the Canadian approach here and see what kind of policy tools we can learn from the Canadians, and hopefully maybe we have something to offer the Canadians as well. So after the presentation, I will open up for a few questions. So please, in the audience, use the Q&A function, and I will read up your questions to Paul and Hobie. So, Paul, I think you're going to start. So I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, and thank you very much to the ISDP for inviting Hobie and I to speak and address this important topic and the Canadian perspectives and our institutional responses to the Canadian perspectives. So we have a fairly large agenda. This is sort of a overall sort of 101 for the Canadian system and the university response. So we will start off just to talk about our universities very briefly. The University of Toronto is a very large university, over 100,000 students, 17,000 faculty, a very large annual research budget, and a very large startup innovation ecosystem.
So Université Laval, as you see, is a bit smaller than the University of Toronto. We have 1,700 professors, researchers, and we're a generalist university. So like the University of Toronto. We're a French-speaking university. However, we have partnerships all around the globe. And it happens so also that we have the largest research forest in the world, which might be of interest maybe for Swedish people, or if you want to do research in extreme environments. Thank you, Paul. Let's move to the research security. So what is research security? Here we provide you with a definition from the Government of Canada. So I will let people read it in more details, but basically the Government of Canada is providing a relatively broad definition that allow for individual institutions to have their own ones beyond that, and and develop their own approach, as we will tell a bit more later on. But the idea is to provide a common basis for each institution.
We'll be moving on to the sort of background and timeline for research security in Canada. So research security in Canada started with a pilot project of the National Security Guidelines for Research Partnerships, which we'll go into later in 2021 at the federal level, and then some budgetary announcements creating a research security center in Canada to provide guidelines and advice for research security. And we move to 2023 when the ministers of Health, the Minister of Public Safety, and the Minister of Science for ISED basically made a statement saying that funding will not go to researchers who are affiliated with organizations connected to risks of military, national defense, state security entities that pose a national security risk to Canada, which then created the Policy on Sensitive Technology and Research Affiliations of Concern, which we will go into. Additionally, the Government of Canada created the Government Universities Working Group, where certain vice presidents of research were given national security clearances to see information regarding threat actor activity targeting universities and university research, and they were brought into the policy development in Canada so that the entire university sector had representation and was able to work with the government to build the policy suite that we now have in Canada. As part of this policy suite, the Government of Canada has the ability to reject grants on national security or research security grounds. To help universities build resiliency to counter this, they created the Research Security Fund, which is a funding mechanism, basically an overhead to provide to universities to build research security teams, such as Hobie's team and my team, to be able to bring in due diligence tools and do training, to improve our cybersecurity posture, and to improve our physical security postures. So this fund was crucial because on one end, the government, as I said, was rejecting and not funding grants, but on the other end, allowed each institution to build resiliency in their own systems to guard against these national security risks. As I mentioned, we have the two main policies. So I'll cover the NSGRP policy from a high level, and Hobie will look at the STRAC policy. So the first policy was the National Security Guidelines for Research Partnerships. This policy requires researchers to fill out a detailed risk assessment form on their applications and does a deep dive analysis of international and domestic partners, any third-party corporate partners involved in this research. Initially, it was on what's called the NSERC Alliance grant, which is a grant that focuses on universities working with corporate partners, and then it was expanded to other grants. So Hobie will now cover the STRAC policy.
The STRAC policy, yes, indeed. So as Paul mentioned earlier, in 2024, in January 2024, the Government of Canada published the Policy on Sensitive Technology Research and Affiliation of Concerns, so the STRAC policy, as we call it. It was enforced in May 2024, so 2 years exactly from now. This policy sets the red line where the government says we will not fund any research where a research team that is progressing an area as a sensitive technology research area where a member of the team has an affiliation with an organization that is part of a list called the named research organization list. So it's a list of 103 organizations that the government of Canada deems that they have very close relationships with the defense and security industry of countries that may pose a high risk to the research that would be funded by the government of Canada. And so if there's a conjunction of progressing those fields of sensitive fields of research and this affiliation, the research team would not be eligible for funding from the government of Canada. And to give a bit more detail about these research areas, if you can move thank you, Paul. So there are 11 sensitive technology research areas that are presented here. We have to understand that these are broad areas. To have a bit more details of what exact subfield of those areas are targeted by the STRAC policy, we have to look into the list in detail. But the idea here is that researchers, universities can have a clear understanding of which fields are red zones whereby it becomes very sensitive for the government to support research with partnerships that are too risky. And so to comply, sorry, just one last thing. To comply with the STRAC policy, research teams, each individual named in the funding proposal has to sign an attestation whereby they just say, I do not have any affiliation with a listed named research organization, and I attest also that my research progresses one of these STRA fields. Thank you, Paul.
So as we can see, the two policies create one with sort of bright lines and lists, and the other is a risk-based approach. So we have that combination of list-based and risk-based with the STRAC and NSGRP. As mentioned in the timeline, the Government of Canada also created the Research Security Center in Public Safety Canada, which is basically Canada's Ministry of the Interior, Ministry of Home Affairs equivalent. And inside that area, there are two different units. There's a unit in Ottawa, which does the deep dive analysis and due diligence and coordinates with the intelligence services, Defense Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and others to then provide advice to the funding agency, whether there are national security risks and whether the funding agency should or should not fund the particular project. It is the decision of the funding agency through the advice from this center. The center has an additional unit that Hobie will talk about.
So there is indeed another unit that is a regional. So Canada, for those who are not aware, is a federation for a political system. So there's the federal government, which has certain powers, but there's also some devolution of power to provinces, and more specifically, the economy, health system, environment to some extent, and other powers. And so this makes so that different provinces, territories throughout Canada don't always have the same culture, system, political system, political culture within each provinces or territory. And so to support those with those specific challenges, the Center for Research Security has also regional branches with 6 regional advisors throughout Canada. So there are 2 in Ontario and 1 in the other regions. So British Columbia, Pacific, to the and Yukon, yes, British Columbia and Yukon to the western part of Canada. Then we have the prairies, where the advisor is based in Edmonton in Alberta. So two in Ontario, as I mentioned, in Toronto, and in Quebec, there's one advisor, and there's one advisor for the provinces in the Atlantic provinces to support universities directly with their specific needs.
The research security policies in Canada fall into what's called the responsible conduct of research. This is guiding principles for all researchers who are handling government funding from the main funding agencies. There are currently proposed updates to this framework that include national security and research security provisions and make them more explicit in this policy. Additionally, the policy is being changed to include prohibitions on malign foreign talent programs. The guidance and these updates are still forthcoming. However, these changes will be pushed forward in some format through discussion of the university's government working group and other consultations. Additionally, in Canada, the Human Pathogens and Toxins Act was updated to require institutions to screen all users of CL3 plus labs for under the Foreign Interference and Security of Information Act, and looking for foreign ownership, control, and influence, which are really research security concerns. This change to the HPTA is the manner and the guidance is still forthcoming, but this is an additional screening to their Health Screening Act, which allows them access to these things. So this users and researchers of CL3 plus will now undergo two different types of screening.
So traditionally, universities in Canada have worked in the defense with defense in a more restricted approach. Since a few years, and more specifically with the change of government that we've had a few months ago, the spending in defense has increased. Research has been securitized. So securitization of research is something that has become very prominent with conversations around research security, but now it's even more prominent because of the increase in the spending in defense, which brings more collaborations between universities and the defense sectors, also including the ministry, the Department of Defense and its research center. And so with these new directions and the growing concern for economic security and sovereignty in general, collaborations are growing, and new collaborations will come with additional security requirements, including security clearances and more investment to upgrade to a certain extent, probably, the means that universities have to protect their most sensitive research with the defense industry. And now Paul will talk about the provincial requirements.
Yeah. As Hobie noted, Canada is a sort of a federated country, and in the division of powers, education is a subnational provincial power. For Ontario, the Ministry of Colleges, Universities, Research Excellence and Security has developed a very robust research security system and policy, not only for individual grants and projects, but recently legislation was passed that all universities must have a research security strategy. So the Ontario research security system works a little bit differently from the federal process. They now use parts of the federal process, but go beyond examining for risks. And when risks are found, risks can be mitigated and collaborated upon with universities to appropriately mitigate risks or put previous risks into content, demonstrating that past behaviors and past connections are adequately severed to move forward to achieve various funding grants and positions. Right now, Ontario, sorry,
go on, Paul.
Ontario is the province that has a very significant and robust system, but other provinces are examining creating their own systems provincially. Sorry, Hobie.
No, it's okay. Thank you. Indeed, as Paul mentioned, Ontario is probably the most advanced province in Canada with its research security system. In Quebec, if I take my example, in Quebec, well, this webinar is quite timely because the government of Quebec, through the research funding, Quebec Research Fund, has announced just at the end of last month how the research security program would work. And so they've decided to adopt the exact same approach as the government of Canada. So applying the national guidelines for, national security guidelines for research and partnerships on one hand, and the STRAC policy on the other hand. So they're just replicating the same system. Currently, they are testing the framework within a pilot project that is underway probably until the end of autumn. And during this pilot, we will be able to first of all, test those framework within the funding that will be offered, but also, and most importantly, test our relationship with the government side research security apparatus that will be deployed to have a co-learning and co-development approach to a certain extent.
Now we're getting into the more interesting parts, how the universities are responding to these research security requirements. So I lead the University of Toronto Research Security Team. I report to the Associate Vice President of International Partnerships, who is also an engineering faculty member. And that's my boss. He reports to the Vice President of Research and the Vice President of International. My team sits squarely inside the Vice President of Research area. So within my team, we have 4 research security advisors, multiple global languages, and significant national security experience. Additionally, we also have the Research Security Committee, which my boss chairs, and this brings in members of university administration from across multiple portfolios, from inside the Vice President International portfolio, from the Vice President International portfolio, from the Chief Information Officer, Chief Information Security Officer, Faculty Administration, and Legal, amongst others.
So my team is so the organization rather of my team is very similar to the one of Paul. My office sits as part of the Vice Presidency for Research and Innovation. My boss is the Assistant Vice President for the Office of Special Initiatives and Research Infrastructure. So he's what we call the Research Security Officer. He's the one to blame if things go awry, and my team receives all the laurels. is the joke that I usually use. But he's still involved in how we develop our framework. So I sit as a research security coordinator. We've recently grown our team with a second research security coordinator, as well as a regulatory compliance coordinator. So perhaps to give a bit more details on the regulatory compliance issue, it's everything that is mainly related to working with defense, so security clearances for the contract security program of the government of Canada, as well as the control goods program, which is also managed by the government of Canada, as well as export controls. As coordinators, we have varied expertise in geopolitics, information security, and research administration. But we coordinate with the other technical expert units within the campus to provide technical support when appropriate to our teams, research teams and administrative teams also. We also have a research security advisory committee where all the core units responsible for deploying security or managing security issues and challenges meet every month to work on issues that need institutional coordination, either for preparation of frameworks or for deployment of measures. And we also have ad hoc working groups. So it's perhaps an intermediary between our research security advisory committee and the perhaps more mature research security committee like the one of Paul, whereby we meet with other units that are not core to security but might be affected or who might affect us. So in international partnership developments, communications, etc., etc. Now, on our roles, Paul.
So the research security team at the University of Toronto, as I said, we have 4 advisors. Each advisor is responsible to one of the main research faculties. So there's an advisor who has main responsibilities to the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering, one for the Arts and Science, another for the Faculty of Medicine, Faculty of Pharmacy, and then each also cover some of the these smaller less impacted faculties as well. One of their main duties is providing outreach and awareness. So my team attends multiple meetings across campus to ensure that researchers understand their requirements and duties for research security policies across the university. They also then do advanced due diligence, and other analysis and provide empirical information for researchers to make their decisions. My team does not have decision-making authority on any decision. We are an advisory service so that PIs and senior leadership can make decisions that are appropriate for the university or as an individual researcher for their research environment and their funding needs. We also provide an assessment to the researcher to say, we think this partnership or this activity will be funded or will not be funded, and provide the reasons why we don't think they will be funded. I will go into some of the other activities throughout the rest of the presentation.
So how we work at Université Laval is also very similar to how teams Paul work. So what I would say here is rather, if we go back to the definition that we had previously from the Government of Canada about research security, for them, research security is about protecting, safeguarding national security interests in research, whereas universities have, to a certain extent, a bit more leeway on the way they can develop research security. And the way we've approached it is that indeed we have to comply, and we want to comply with government requirements. However, our role as research security teams is not just simply to abide by the framework developed by the government, but also to protect the research enterprise of our respective universities. And so whether it's research in social science that is relatively could be interpreted as low-key and with few stakes, for us it is as important to protect as the research that has national security implications. And so because there are some different contexts around academic freedom depending on the provinces and territories. So, for instance, here in Quebec, there's a law that protects academic freedom. Universities might have different approaches to how they develop their research security programs. So the ones that we've developed at University of Toronto and Université Laval is more about protecting, safeguarding the whole research enterprise. Other universities, depending on the means that they have, because it is also dependent on that, might have a more strict compliance approach, so abiding to the STRAC policy and the NSGRP, sorry, whereas others might have programs that are in between those two extremes of the spectrum. So, yeah, the tools.
One of the main functions of a research security team is to conduct advanced due diligence and inform researchers and leadership of potential risks. So risk identification and risk mitigation. Research security teams across Canada use a variety of tools, including paid tools, tools that exist in university libraries, and free open source tools. These tools help gather information and provide accurate and timely advice to individual researchers so that they can see the potential risks and then work to mitigate those risks. Without the due diligence part, without understanding risk, research security wouldn't be in Canada, wouldn't be where it is right now. The University of Toronto, with assistance from our colleagues at the University of British Columbia, have created a self-assessment tool. This self-assessment tool is publicly available on our website and is embedded inside of the research application that researchers need to get all of their approvals and permissions. This self-assessment tool allows researchers to have an advanced understanding of where they will fall inside of the various policies that were mentioned, the NSGRP, the STRAC policy, provincial policy, and we've also brought in some of the international policies that our researchers work with quite frequently, such as US, UK, and Horizons Europe policies. Most of the answers are usually somewhere in the gray area, which then sends researchers to my team to seek further advice so that we can provide accurate, tailored advice to each researcher in their own specific environment.
So a lot of universities throughout Canada have similar risks security self-assessment, research security self-assessment tool. However, as Paul mentioned, the UBC and University of Toronto's tool is probably one of the most advanced, so I won't say much more about it. Most of the things that we will present next in the following slides, we have similar approaches. So I'll let Paul present most of it, and I will complete with additional information where it is relevant for us.
A lot of the Canadian universities now are looking at international visiting graduate students, ensuring that the students that are coming in aren't bringing in undue risk to the research environment and potential funding avenues. So my team does screening on the international visiting graduate students and provides that screening information to the individual researchers so that they can decide which projects those students can be involved in, if any, and while ensuring that those students also have a really good and robust study time as well. And what I want to highlight here is that we are looking at visiting graduate students. The way both the Canadian and Ontario policies are set up is that full-time students and full-time faculty, their main affiliation becomes the University of Toronto. And as long as they don't maintain an affiliation to, a previous entity that brings that has been named as being risky, people can continue on. The system was set up this way so that we are not putting it undue punishments for people's past activities. We're looking at a current and going forward method, not punishing those for people for having affiliations or degrees or education from somewhere that we now deem risky, but in the past we hadn't deemed risky.
What is just one word on the reviews for visiting students and visiting professors. What is interesting here is that administratively, this kind of process starts outside of the Vice Presidency for Research. Generally, it's either human resources or student affairs. And this is where the coordination and work with units throughout the campus for research security teams becomes increasingly critical, as the information will come from these services and we are not necessarily the first people to be aware of it. And so this coordination becomes very central into maintaining the overall research security posture of the institution. Thank you, Paul. I'll let you move on.
Absolutely correct. Developing relationships across various university units is very important for research security, as the policies and research security has these knock-on effects far beyond what we would consider traditional, in the lab research. You need to expand the aperture quite a bit. The University of Toronto has a loaner device program, basically clean devices for senior executives and researchers traveling to areas of high digital risk. This program also involves us doing digital forensics when devices come back to look for intrusions. When we initially proposed this program to our Information Council, the Information Council said they wanted some factual information showing that universities are at risk. There's an understanding that governments use clean devices, and some of the large multinational corporations and banks and consultancies do this because they are known to be at risk. But there is not a significant body of publicly available information showing that universities specifically are at risk. So that's why the University of Toronto added a digital forensics system to this. We've now created a website on travel and device security as well. And we work on the loaner device program very closely with our Chief Information Security Officer and their information security team. Additionally, we have a procurement and supply chain risk program where, again, we work very closely with information security and the Chief Information Security Officer. In this program, the information security team looks at the digital risks from connected digital technologies, and my team looks at the geopolitical risks and connectivity to foreign military or intelligence apparatus. And then we provide the Chief Information Security Officer and the requesting unit head with risk advice so that they can make decisions whether to go forward with that procurement or not.
At Université Laval, we haven't reached yet the maturity to deploy an institutionalized loaner device program. We're still working on this, but procurement is where it becomes interesting with the to observe the effect of provincial rules on the research security deployment. So procurement is a matter of provincial devolution. And so in Quebec, publicly funded universities have to abide to the rules of the Treasury Board Secretariat, which are very strict, which have very strict rules on public tenders and also have relatively low thresholds. So you can quickly go into public tender. And this, because of those rules, it has made it difficult, even with the involvement of our teams for geopolitical risk assessments and the information security team with everything that is information security related. to procure certain sensitive technologies. And so it has made it quite a challenge. And currently, we are working with the government of Quebec to better inform those issues to the Treasury Board, and hopefully a few adaptations might come at some point, but currently this creates some risk to our infrastructures because of this lessened control on the overall procurement process that Quebec universities may have compared to other provinces.
Additionally, research security teams across provide advice beyond specific research. At the University of Toronto, we've created what's called the Blue Door Community, which is business development officers from each of the faculties and central administration. This group meets every 2 weeks to provide best practices and information on various international partnerships that are being developed. My team now sits on the Blue Door Community so that we can provide very early access advice. We found that when the research security team was providing risk advice closer to the time of a signature or an official partnership that showed high risk, people were realizing that they were using 1, 2, 3, or 5 years of work to get to that partnership, and then my team would come in and provide that risk advice at the end. So now, sitting on this Blue Door Community, we're able to provide risk advice basically after the first or second meeting, so that the time and effort are not wasted in bringing in partnerships that could be highly risky. Very similarly with the international office, when we're doing institution-to-institution partnerships, my team is integrated into that risk advice so that risks with certain partners can be mitigated. And a lot of this is using that STRA list that Hobie spoke of and ensuring that high-risk partnerships are not involved in those areas, but can be maintained in areas that are deemed to be lower risk to the university.
Let's move to next slides. So, as Paul mentioned, there's a will to rapidly identify where risks emerge, and also to protect the research enterprise through its whole spectrum. And so protecting research is one thing, protecting innovation, so when it starts coming out of the university and within startups and companies, there's also a will to start working on safeguarding the research that goes there. So Paul, would you like to talk about your startups accelerators? Because here at Université Laval, it's a bit emerging for now, these relationships.
The University of Toronto Research Security Team has started working with the University of Toronto Startup Accelerators and University Entrepreneurship teams. We're basing our advice off of the Five Eyes Secure Innovation platforms. Each of the Five Eyes countries put out a relatively similar approach to innovation, secure innovation, and we're adapting that to advise our startup accelerators. As you can see in the chart, peak vulnerability for research security and national security risk is literally the same place where startups are vulnerable to other issues, that so-called valley of death. We've seen that malign actors take advantage of this valley of death to get access to research and technologies and IP and other sensitive information. So we are now providing some advice and best practices to the startup accelerator community. So far, in working with the U of T entrepreneurship group, we've been able to advise on at least 4 organizations that were either what we would call a pitch competition, where researchers pitch their ideas, similar to Shark Tank, or malign conferences or venture capital companies that are highly tied to military and security apparatus of malign entities, so that we're not working with those entities. Whereas 10 years ago or so, those entities would have been allowed into the ecosystem and would have been siphoning off a lot of our technologies. And lastly, we will move to community building in Canada, which is another, I believe, a strength of what Canada has done for research security.
So as an overall community, we understand that universities don't have the same means, and since research is very collaborative, your weakest link is also maybe the main source of risk that comes to your project. And so we are trying to work together in leveling the basis understanding and best practices around research security. We do this through a national group, informal group that we call Team Canada, which regroups 72 public research institutions and 210 individuals currently, which I have the privilege of being the support officer of, the chair being York University this year. And Paul is actually one of the founding members of this community, which you founded, which year? Can you remind us, Paul?
About 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
This community started with 3 universities, and now we're up to well over 70.
Indeed. And so there's this national community, but there are also provincial ones. Well, Paul, since you're managing the largest ones, I'll let you talk about them.
So the University of Toronto does not have its own academic hospital. We have a academic health science network of over 15 hospitals across Toronto. So I chair a community of practice with those hospitals to provide research security advice tailored to their needs. And the hospital network, a lot of the researchers in those hospitals have a cross appointment to the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine. Those hospital networks also participate as observers in Team Canada. Additionally, created a research institutions network. So these are third-party research institutions that are highly involved in the networks of universities. So I also host a quarterly call with these institutions. They do participate as observers in Team Canada, but they also have their own unique call. And then as Hobie mentioned, each province or region has a sort of a sub-research security group to provide research security there. I am the co-chair of the Council of Ontario Universities Research Security Community of Practice. There's also a U15, our 15 most research intensive universities. We have a research security table, and then Hobie is involved in the Quebec community as well.
Yes, indeed. I do lead the Quebec community of practice around research security. And we also, so there's the U15 group, U15 Research Security Group, but U15 and Universities Canada are also advocacy groups. So they talk with government, and sometimes we liaise with them to coordinate messages around research security.
And that is the end of the high-level overview of the Canadian research security system and the responses from Université Laval and the University of Toronto.
Thank you very much. Extremely interesting. And it pops up hundreds of questions regarding, and especially, I actually going to start with the audience, but it strikes me that this sort of a federal provincial distinction is creating a bit of issues, and then of course the challenges I guess opportunities and challenges that the decentralization actually carries. I mean, Canada is unique in many of these cases. both from a linguistic level, but I guess also from, native populations and other aspects of it. But I'm gonna start with the audience, and I recommend you, if you have any questions in the audience, please use the Q&A and type down your question. But Christian Wolf Suzuki asked, if I may, I would like to pose two questions. Could you please give examples of what kind of support the regional advisors give to the universities? And two, how is the acceptance of the securitization of research among Canadian researchers and university leaders? I mean, as I said, maybe put it more provocationally, do they always want to be protected? I mean, we do have that same thing in Sweden as well. When we do see that universities tend to defend, to a large extent, academic freedom, and of course, the security community look at security issues. And where do you get the perfect balance there between security and innovation? I mean, the never-ending story. So, if anybody would like to jump in there.
Maybe we'll tackle the second question as it's more difficult and more broad, and then move to the first question. So the second question, I can speak from my perspective, then Hobie from his perspective. When the idea of research security and these policies first came out, as I said, I and my team, we did significant outreach presentations across the University of Toronto to inform the research community, both at leadership levels, deans, vice deans, chairs, and individual researchers. There was no one single response across the board. The way the government has framed this is for funded research projects. So theoretically, researchers can seek funding elsewhere or conduct certain types of research without government funding. So there is still these aspects. However, the Canadian system works basically on these grant funds, on federal funding. So they're not really dampening overall academic freedom. The government, and I don't work for the government anymore, I used to, but I can sort of comment, the government is putting protections around the funding from the government. So it is not an overall system, but it is highly centralized around government funding. And as I also noted, my team provides advice. My team is not a decision-making authority, so decisions are not coming from me. I'm not evaluating and saying, yes, you can, or no, you cannot. I'm providing the advice and showing empirically the risk so that it is a PI or a primary investigator, a research-focused decision-making process so that they can make the decisions that are most appropriate for their research environment, for their researchers, with the additional thought of their students as well. A lot of the advice and response I've received from researchers were saying, well, theoretically, I could make this decision for myself, but if I make a decision that is highly risky, my students and my labs, they would have that impact as well. And that could put their students in a position that may not allow their students to achieve things long term. So that's one of the considerations researchers have brought to me, is that they're not only protecting themselves, they're protecting the impact and potential ramifications on their students.
Indeed. And as if we can remind about the national security guidelines for research and partnership, more specifically, there are guidelines. So what the government asks from researchers and institutions is to make sure that they have identified the risks, at least the major risks, that they have done some due diligence, and that institutions are able to provide the appropriate means to protect these, to mitigate the risks that have been identified based on those means and the identified risks and the information governments has, they are able to assess whether yes or no we are truly able to mitigate those risks. But this is only, as Paul mentioned, for government-funded research. Outside of that, the guidelines are an invitation to reuse the words of the government, are an invitation for institutions to just develop a due diligence process in general. And if I talk about Quebec in particular, because I don't hear Paul mention it, as I said previously, there's a law in Quebec that protects academic freedom and prevents a university from telling a researcher you can do this kind of research or work with this person or not work with them. We have had to do, and we are still doing, extensive outreach work to inform both the administration and researchers that our work as research security advisors is to advise. We do not compel to do things. We do not forbid to do things. We do not authorize anything. We just expose the risk, educate people on them, so that they can be able to make an informed decision. To a certain extent, institutions, when their infrastructure for which they are responsible, when the institution evaluates that there's too much risk for the institution, they might be able to take some decisions to limit certain work, certain activity, but this is not at our level of decision. We do not take decisions on that. And perhaps to answer the first question on what regional advisors do. So as I mentioned previously, not all universities throughout Canada have the same means to, or the same extent to support their research security program. And so regional advisors are here to help with specific questions that come from individual universities or from a group of universities. But if we talk about individual universities, there are universities where people have several hats. They're research advisors, they're compliance officers, they're research security advisors, etc., etc. And overall, they do like 2 hours of research security in the week. Whereas Paul and I, we have teams of 4 people doing the job full time. And so the maturity, the growing their maturity is much slower. The means that they have might be very different. And so their knowledge also might be different. And so this is where research security advisors at the Research Security Center become critical, because they can help those people with, well, I have a question with export controls. I don't understand this requirement. Or is there a geopolitical aspect pertaining to this question, etc.? There, the Research Security Center is able to provide an informed comment on their context, on the situation, so that the advisor is able to either relay the information to their administration or adjust their risk assessment when appropriate.
They also provide significant training and webinars and other ways to distribute information. They also will bring in expertise from other parts of the government. They recently hosted the foreign ministry to speak to a specific, doing research with specific countries, and bringing in other various areas of expertise. So they're a window into the rest of the government as well, beyond this. And then their training. They will conduct due diligence training, information security training, travel and risk trainings as well, for the university enterprise.
Just quickly, I mean, to what extent, this is Mathilde Huard, to what extent can differences in fragmentation and regulatory frameworks regarding academic freedom resulting from regional and territorial divisions hinder efforts to develop and strengthen guidelines on research security? And then I would also like to throw in the Melitas Pachulia's question there, if you can give recommend any concrete steps to university in Europe? Because, well, you have the federal thing, but I mean, we in a sense have the same problems that you have national governments. We have a central government in Brussels, and we have our national governments, and then of course we have an additional layer, the universities in itself. I mean, what would be your concrete recommendations that you see have been successful in Canada and maybe is lacking in Europe?
I'll start by addressing, with an anecdote, one of the first questions. We had a researcher come to us. They were applying for a joint Ontario and federal funding opportunity. So we had to go through the Ontario system, the federal system. The person wanted to also be involved in a Horizons Europe grant and receive US NIH funding. So that's Ontario, Canadian federal, Horizons, and NIH for one person. That's 4 different research security systems that we had to help this researcher navigate. And it's not a lowest common denominator system, it's a highest common denominator system. So we had to look across to see, what their duties and requirements for all of these things, and then making sure that, the highest bar is crossed for all of their research enterprise and their research network. So, that takes a lot of effort to understand the intersections of all of those policies. So it's not just Canadian regional, it's global. We want to make sure that research is still global. So we have to be able to advise researchers for all of these areas. And the earlier we can get this advice, the earlier that their initial decisions, so that they can have that view and that wide lens of the impact of a decision today can have ramifications for 5 years or 10 years to their entire research environment and their research career. So the very short answer to that question is it is quite difficult to navigate all these different layers. And right now, researchers in Quebec, if they want to work on projects funded by the Ontario government, researchers in other provinces have to abide by the Ontario system. And as the other provinces in Canada develop parallel systems, luckily Quebec's is looking at sort of mimicking the federal system. So it's not really a different system. But if other provinces develop different systems, that's even more navigation. In some ways, Canada has similarities to Germany with the Länder. If each German federal state started making their own policies, that would, be an equally difficult situation. So that's on that end. On the advice for Europe, this is a very very sort of niche version and a little bit of my bias and background. I think risk analysis, risk identification, and risk analysis is one of the most important parts. So being able to conduct advanced due diligence, having the appropriate empirical information to then advise senior leadership and researchers of the risks. Without that demonstration of risk connectivity, I don't think a research security program can really get anywhere. So that would be my first suggestion is investing in information and risk identification, risk awareness, and risk mitigation.
I do agree with Paul that a risk-based approach seems critical. We're probably a bit biased because we're in Canada and this is how the system has been established rather than being just compliance as it might be in other jurisdictions. But we feel that indeed risk-based approach allows for, first of all, establishing a broader due diligence process that is also aligned with the values of your institution. But also, it forces you to get a bit more informed about what is happening elsewhere. And a concrete step, an easy one, I would say, is attending these kinds of webinar or research security conferences where international which have an international scope, because this is where you get to know how other people, how other jurisdictions work, and it creates a basis of knowledge that you might not be an expert of, but at least you do have some references that you can contact to ask questions, to develop your network, which also contributes in maintaining this global collaboration process that has been built around research, that indeed currently there's a lot that seems to be receding to a certain extent, depending on which countries we're talking about. But being informed, being aware of the risks, first of all, is what will help you maintain as much as you can and take as much risk as your institution is willing to take to develop those international collaborations that might be sensitive until the point where you reach a red line where either your institution is not comfortable or the government says, oh, there's a red line, you can't go there, and where you'll have to stop. But otherwise, these are indeed the basic steps that we believe are important.
To add on to Hobie's point, attending conferences such as the ASCE at Texas A&M and the upcoming Encores conference with TU Delft in Europe and other conferences like that, developing a network. None of us have figured out research security, and the only way we can do this is together through partnerships, through having a network to call upon others to ask these difficult questions and share learnings and share experiences on dealing with some very difficult challenges.
I think that's a very good note actually to end with, because that's at least, I mean, that's what we do in academia. We collaborate, we develop, we generate new thinking. I was about to ask you who is your main adversary, and if it differs over Canada and if it's states, companies, but since you're Canadian, so polite that I assumed you wouldn't like to single out anyone, but it adds a new thing. I mean, I think it also is the targets or the adversaries varies over time and in sectors and everything. And I think that exactly as you said, both of you, that we need increased collaboration to identify and to figure out what we do. And and I thought this was an extremely interesting webinar, and I am extremely grateful for two outstanding speakers. So I was to say, as always, please join me in a hand to the speakers. You can't hear them, but a lot of people are applauding right now. So thank you very much. And to the audience, please stay tuned. We're going to have a few more speakers next term. So please join us in these conversations. So Paul, Hobie, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
The invitation for having us. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good day.